Hey everybody, this is Master Cicerone Rich Higgins, and I am here with another beer tasting. Today I am very excited to say that we are going to taste some Gueuze, the classic Gueuze from Cantillon. This is a very interesting beer, to say the least. It is intentionally sour. It's also intentionally kind of earthy, funky, barnyardy, which sounds strange, but if you like stinky cheeses, you're going to like this sort of beer. It is not overwhelmingly stinky and barnyardy. Those are just sort of the top lines that people are that this beer is sort of famous for. But it's certainly not the most prevalent set of aromas in the beer, set of flavors in the beer. It really has a lot of other flavors and aromas from kind of bready to winey to fruity, in addition to having a little bit of kind of a savory element. It is a type of lambic called a Gueuze, and a Gueuze is a blend of lambics that are often 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year aged. And they are blended into this, and then they are bottle conditioned so that it becomes a highly carbonated beer inside the bottle. The lambic production process is kind of a crazy process. It involves taking a beer with raw wheat as well as barley malt in it and aged hops, which is kind of strange. Usually hops are used for their aromatic properties. You want to make sure that they smell good, and then they would impart their interesting aromas of flowers, herbs, things like that to a beer. That's when you use normal kind of unaged hops. However, the lambic brewing process typically uses aged hops because the brewers don't want the hop aromas to get in the way of the aromas of the fermentation and the aging. Okay, so those hoppy aromas would sort of get in the way, so you're never going to taste a Gueuze or a lambic that really tastes like what you'd expect an IPA to smell like or something like that. Beyond that, it has a lot of different yeasts and bacteria. Well, I know bacteria gets scary, but this is actually good for you bacteria. And it has a lot of different types of wild yeasts and bacteria that get in there and ferment it very slowly over a number of years. And it becomes a very complex beverage. Also, it's spontaneously fermented, which means that the brewers are not intentionally adding any specific yeasts or bacteria in order to ferment this beer. So most of the time when you have a beer from a regular commercial brewery, it's a regular beer, the brewers will be adding a yeast that either they have propagated themselves in their brewery, or more commonly they've purchased it from a yeast lab. So they know exactly what's in that yeast. It's gone through quality controls, quality checks, and microscopes and things like that. They know exactly what they're adding into their unfermented beer in order to ferment it. And what comes out is a beer that's very predictable, and you know exactly what's going to happen to it as long as you treat your yeast correctly. And there's usually only one strain of yeast in there, and there's no bacteria. So that's kind of a regular way of producing and fermenting beer. However, the older way of doing it, before things like microscopes and thermometers and understandings of microbiology, people didn't really know, or brewers really didn't know how to cultivate any one specific set of yeast or bacteria. They didn't know the difference between yeast and bacteria, for instance. And they just let their beer ferment. They would brew what's called a wort, or unfermented beer, allow it to ferment, and often use the what looked like the sludge, but essentially it's the yeasty sort of slurry or yeasty. It looks almost like a milkshake at the bottom of their vats, and put it into the next set of vats or barrels in order to ferment that beer. The breweries that did the best job with that ended up having the best. Well, two things. One would either be the best microbiological controls. They didn't really know what they were doing, but what they were doing was working and making the beers as predictable as possible, often not particularly sour. Or if they had a wild set of yeasts and wild set of bacteria that was wafting in from the farm fields in the air, wafting in on the wind, that would end up fermenting those beers. And they could be very kind of funky, very wild, very sour tasting, but it came down to the art of blending. So the brewmaster was an important person that would actually brew the beer, but also almost the more important person in that sort of brewery is the blender, the master blender, that can taste all the different vats, all the different barrels of beer, and make sure that they say, all right, well, this one's a little bit sweet, this one's a little bit sour, this one's a little bit earthy, this one's a little bit fruity. Let's put them all together and make the perfect beer. Or they might say, this barrel just doesn't fit in this blend, so this barrel we're going to leave alone, taste it again next year. But these other 4 barrels, these other 3 barrels, whatever, are going to come together to create this perfect beer that we want as our house flavor, our signature of the brewery. And so with that sort of consistency of blending, being able to take sort of what nature gives you, all those kind of curveballs, and make something that's delicious as well as consistent, more or less consistent from year to year or batch to batch, because they're able to know exactly what proportions to blend things in. That's really the art of blending, and so that's something that Cantillon does very, very well. All right, so blah, 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 enough talk. Let's actually taste this thing. All right, so Cantillon does a regular regular crown on top of the bottle. So this is the crown here, but they also have a regular wine cork in it as well. So let's go ahead and pull that. Get that in there. It's amazingly hard to do this when the bottle is at shoulder level like this. It's funny. I do this all the time while standing up. All right, so it should come out with a pop because it's a highly carbonated beer within this bottle. Okay, let's go ahead and pour. Normally, the traditional glass would be something like this, kind of a straight tumbler. It's really this type of beer is a rustic artisan farmhouse beer. Nowadays, it's become very kind of rare, and because it's so highly sought after, it's become pretty expensive. And so oftentimes in bars and often at my house too, I'll pour in this sort of stemware. This is a good all-purpose kind of basic beer tulip or beer goblet here. So I'm going to pour in this. It does concentrate the aromas a little bit better, allows me to figure out exactly what this beer tastes like. All right, so we'll do sort of a modest little pour for starters here. Okay, so what we see here is a crystal clear beer that is a nice golden color yellow. A little thin bit of foam on top. If I had poured it a little bit more vigorously, it certainly would have more foam. There's plenty of CO2 in here to build up that head of foam. And plus with the wheat that's in there, this is probably 30 to 40% unmalted wheat. That also has a lot of proteins that will build up the head and build up the body of the beer. Okay, so let's take a smell. Ooh. That's fun. Oh yeah, that's good. Okay, so on top of it is, well, let's look at it this way. Sort of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Okay, two different beers in one. Okay, beer with two different personalities. First and foremost, it is fruit forward. So a lot of fruit coming off the nose or in the bouquet, but it also has a savory element to it, and that undertone of earthiness that can be described as funky or barnyardy. Okay, so I do smell bread dough, bread crust, a little bit of honey. Okay, that's kind of it for malty aromas. That bread dough is a combination of malt aromas, but also earthiness from the yeast. So dough is cereal grains, whether it's wheat or rye or however you're making your dough, but it's also yeast as well. So yeast is a fungus, so it will give you earthy, kind of mushroomy aromas. We'll get to the earthy stuff in a minute. Okay, so beyond that, I'm smelling plenty of fruit, lots of sour fruit, unripe fruit. So a little bit of grapefruit. We've got a touch of green, it's like a floral green, like calamansi or lime zest. Also some, a bit of, it's kind of tropical. This is gonna sound crazy, especially in America, but around the world, commonly eaten fruit is called guanabana or soursop. I'm getting some of that in here. It smells a little bit like Lemon's Marigold. I used to live in San Francisco. There's a lot of plants out there called Lemon's Marigold, and it smells a lot like that. That's that guanabana aroma. It also has a bit of a faint nuttiness, sort of like a skin-off almond thing. It also smells like apricot pits, like noyau is the French for it that you find in wines and liqueurs over there. It's a peach pit aroma, apricot pit aroma with a little bit of almond extract, so kind of a nuttiness, fruitiness in there. Moving out of there's also some canned pineapple in there. So I have a lot of like green sour fruits, citrus fruits, but also a little bit of overripe or cooked pineapple in there. And then certainly some green grape, white wine. Oh God, there's a lot going on here. Getting into spices, touch of clove, touch of white pepper. Yeah, let's back out of spices. There's just a hint of smoke. All right, let's get into sort of like the weirder aromas. Okay, there's a little bit of smoke, a little bit of uh, hay, horse blanket, barnyard. So moving up the earthiness spectrum. Okay, we've got like dried mushrooms, dried leaves, forest floor. Getting more into the cheeses, we got like the white rind on the outside of Camembert or Brie cheese. So I think that's Candidium Penicillium candidum. I think is the species of that. So like a white rind, bloomy rind cheese. There's also aromas of like wet wool or lanolin. It's a little bit like goat cheese, chèvre sort of thing, but also a touch of wax and certainly a little bit of horse manure. Okay, that's when you hear barnyard, we're often talking about horse manure. It doesn't sound lovely. There's a species of yeast in here called Brettanomyces yeast, and Brettanomyces yeast is also in horse manure. So it's the main culprit that makes horse manure smell like horse manure. Um, I learned that from a master sommelier that I was chatting with one time, and he blew me away with that fact. Um, so there's definitely some dust and kind of like a little bit of caper or green olive or something. There's a real world of kind of earthy, savory things going on underneath all that those bright white wine and fruity aromas too. And then sourness. So it does smell sour. It smells like lactic acid for sure. So a lot of like kind of yogurty, sourdough bread aromas, a little bit of pickle aroma. But then, oh man, there's also some dill too. So dill I associate with American oak especially, but this is probably all French oak and it's probably all well. There's probably some sherry barrels too, um, but it should be neutral. Anyway, so there's a little bit of herbaceous note too. All right, so Cantillon is famous for having a little bit of a touch of vinegar aroma, or actually vinegar acid, so acetic acid in its beers. Most lambic producers try to avoid that. Cantillon embraces just a touch of it. Um, I don't smell a lot in this one. So it's possible that they are trying to phase it out of this one, or it just didn't bloom in this one, or it might be in some of their other products, other lambics beyond their goods. Um, type some bruised apple too. Yeah, I'm kind of going all over the place. All right, anyway, let's go ahead and taste this thing. Man, that's lovely. The success of this sort of brewery or this sort of beer is it's its ability to focus some of the brighter, more kind of acceptable, less bizarre aromas at the top, and then still have that wealth of complexity and savory note underneath it, and not have that get out of balance. So when I taste it, I get all of those aromas that I was smelling. Um, it dries out in a couple different ways. First of all, it is a sour beer. It does have a good wallop of acidity. That acidity is tempered a little bit by some tannin that comes from oak aging. So it does have some structure, yeah, it's just like it's a structural thing. It's not really a grippy like astringency. It's just a nice structure that allows the acidity to get some body and some elegance. So it does have that sourness, and so it makes it seem more elegant as well as more refreshing, despite all those crazy aromas. Okay, so it is a very harmonious beer where it ties all those aromas together and allows you to experience them on the nose as well as on the palate, as well as in the aftertaste. The aftertaste is very long. It still lasts, lasting well into probably a minute since I last took a sip. So yeah, it's an absolutely delicious beer. Excellent version of a Guz, and it is traditionally, well, you could drink it on its own. Oh, I was going to say that's right. It has a creaminess that in wine you would call a leesiness. So it's spent a lot of time in oak barrels with yeast, with contact with the yeast, and so that contact with the yeast gives it a little bit of a silkiness, a little bit of softness. So it's got the harshness from the acid, it's got the structure from the tannin, it's got a little bit of soft creaminess, leesiness that also is part of that bread dough aroma and some of those nutty aromas too. So the contact with that yeast gives it a really nice, elegant. It's a méthode champenoise in a way. It's been aged on that yeast. I shouldn't say méthode champenoise because it does have yeast at the bottom of it. So anyway, it would be drunk just straight as is, or consumed with any sort of savory food. Excuse me, anything fatty, salty, fried fish, French fries, certainly cheese. So I'm having it with a little bit of Parmesan. So Parmesan is often thought of as just something you grate over food, but it's awesome on its own, and it's incredible with this beer too. That'll do. And then also have some anchovy stuffed olives. Those are fun. Exceptional. Absolutely delicious. All right, santé.